I think the plan is I'm going to try and go on, talk and demonstrate for about 35 minutes. Does that sound all right? And then there seems to be beer and pizza still, and then I'll have a drink. So thank you, Daniela. Basically, I'm a computer scientist, right? I make stuff, I design stuff, and in particular, I make AI, not to automate, but to support humans in tasks. And over the last 5 years or so, I've been particularly interested in creativity. There's a whole backstory to why that is. You can ask me over a beer afterwards, but that's not really the point. And we built a whole set of tools that are around supporting human creativity in work that you wouldn't normally associate to be creative. So we've put apps into factories to support workers on production lines making tractors to think more creatively about health and safety, which really isn't a very sexy creativity topic. One that's really important is helping carers of older people with dementia to think creatively about what you can do to help a person in a particular situation gain a little bit more from life by thinking creatively about what they do. We've done it in sports training and other domains. And so I'm leveraging, and we have been leveraging for the last couple of years, a lot of that experience in now what are 2 projects. So you'll notice each project we have has a particular branding. So I've had to kind of splice the 2 together here, and both of my project brand managers will be upset by this, but you'll get the gist. So what I'm going to be doing is essentially talking in 3 stages. First of all, I'm going to talk about a project and what is now a product that should launch as a startup about this time next year once we've done all the engineering work, called Inject, which is a tool for use for general journalists, i.e. people working in all sorts of journalism, to enhance their creativity and sometimes their productivity in finding new angles on stories quickly when they've got a deadline of an hour or so. So the tool is essentially working behind the scenes to come up with possible creative angles. So that's Inject. What I will then do is do a live demo. It always makes me nervous. This thing's running in newsrooms, and yet I still get nervous about this. I blame the networks or something. It's Sage Ocean's networks. I'll blame it. Oh, there you go. Get the blame out of the way. We'll run a demo quickly on a topic that's kind of sciencey related, and then that will lead into the new project, which is called Quest, which is essentially for us, and our part of this European funded project, to take the Inject tool and essentially specialize it and tailor it for science journalism. And I suppose the offer here is that our part of the project starts on the 1st of August, and we will then embark on an intense 12-month product development and testing. And we're strong believers in co-design, so there will be an opportunity to get involved if you're still interested after having watched. What's the origins of this? Really, this work started on a park bench in 2015. I was sat talking to our head of journalism at City. So City has a very well-established journalism department. And I simply asked the head of department, is there any room for creativity in journalism? It almost seemed like a patronizing question. It's one of the creative industries. However, he said, that's interesting, there are very few digital tools that actually help journalists think creatively around stories. So this led us into the development of a tool that basically, we're not trying to improve the creativity of journalists per se, we're just helping them try and be as creative as they can be with the resources, the reducing unit of resource, and then try and also free them up for some of the constraints related to the conservatism that arise when you're facing job losses. So a lot of work that we did led to this concept of new digital creativity support that will help journalists generate stories that are good, novel and useful. So they're still going to be useful stories, but they have got a novel angle to them. And if we can help people to do that at least as more productively than before, then we're fine. So this led to an Inject product, which we've evaluated in newsrooms, and I'm not going to talk about that unless it comes up in conversation, just to try and keep to the story. Just to give you some background here, and this kind of replicates, we'll replicate this with the new project, if you see what I mean, which is I'm saying this. We worked very closely with journalists to design the tool. I think that we believe in human-centered AI, not just in developing AI that works with and augments human capabilities rather than automating them, but also to allow people to have a stake in the design process. So as part of working closely with journalists, we established not just a set of needs or requirements, but a set of values that the tool shouldn't over-automate. our tool can actually do more than it does, but we chose as a design decision not to make it do that, simply because we wanted to give the creative power. The journalists are still the creative agents. We conducted lots of semi-structured interviews. As soon as we had basic ideas, we built what are called paper prototypes. We just designed it on paper and shoved bits of paper in front of people and said, what do you think about that? That led to what they call then sort of digital mock-ups and wireframes. We built prototypes. We did loads of usability testing. We had the kicked out of us in some of the usability sessions. And it went on until we ended up with essentially the product. So it was interesting when Daniela said, what is this? It's technically a sidebar. It's not a separate tool per se. Inject is designed as a sidebar that pops up on the right-hand side, a bit like the Google sidebar. That's where we got the inspiration from, in whatever tool that you're working. So you can kind of switch the creativity on or off just by pressing the app button or closing that. And that was the key thing. Journalists said, whatever you do, do not clutter up our desktop with yet another app or yet another thing to open. So it's essentially a plugin that works in pretty much most of the text editors that we identified that people are working with. So that's actually what it looks like if you're working in Google Docs. That's some sort of, you're writing a story about Yemen, which is a sort of crisis that's ongoing that really is poorly understood by many people. The app appears on the right-hand side and you can remove it. And so far we've got versions that run in Google Docs, Adobe InCopy, WordPress, various content management systems that run certain types of editors. And then of course we keep coming across newsrooms that made their own. I have to say, the amount of newsrooms that I've come across, we made this in 1994 and John down the corridor can still make it work. This gives us problems, so our solution was essentially also to build a web app version where you can just kind of reshape the web browser window to go there as well, but it's not quite as integrated. So that is essentially how it works. And for Quest, the science journalism tool, it's going to look the same way. We don't see why science journalists are going to have any fundamentally different requirements to how they work to other journalists. So what we're designing will kind of run on these text editors almost straight away, and it will still have this sidebar feel to it. I don't see that changing. So as I said, it's kind of this fixed Twix sidebar, and you think, well, there's not much information on it. Well, you can scroll up and down it. That's the key trick. And it's got a number of key features to it. The first is that you can sort of control the direction of creative thinking by either putting in keywords, and I'll show you later, highlighting the text in your editor, and then the tool will work out what your keywords might be. You can then control the direction of the tool with these icons. So one of the first things we did, me not knowing, the advantage of not being an expert in journalism, you can ask some really stupid questions. So we spoke to experienced journalists and say, so how do you come up with a new angle on a story that people have written about dozens of times? And they kind of look at you like you're an idiot. But eventually you get to the bottom of it, and we identified and codified eventually 6 strategies that kept coming up and up again amongst highly experienced journalists. The first one is look for strategies that are about data and evidence. Go and find me stuff that's got data and evidence and backing information that I can write a story about. The second one is the human angle. There's always a personal or human angle in a story, so we built that. This one indicates causal. Give me the long read, give me the background. If you're going to write about Brexit, where did it start? 1988, 1992, something like that. Go right back. Quirky. This was really humorous. They said, we like something that's funny. So codify humor. We cheated on that one, and I might be able to show you an example of that later. Ramifications, which is the future direction. So what does this mean for the future? So we search and we creatively search for content that might be about the future. And then the last one was the one we haven't actually implemented, is pull out data and information visualizations from news that we could borrow or source. So they're the 6, and 5 are implemented and working. So once you do that, you click on one of those and you combine it with your keywords, and then it comes back and says interesting things. So we pull out news. So one of the key values of journalists, they said, we want to come up with creative angles based on validated news sources. So they don't want to go into some online data source or Twitter. They were quite keen to build on validated news sources from reputable sources. I'm just checking what I've got there. The Mirror and the Irish Independent are reputable. But so basically, the tool is creatively searching for news that might be related to Yemen, but the creative search strategies often pull out things that are related but different. So I think the key difference between the engine, the search tool we have, is if you go to Google or Bing and you type in X, it'll come back with X. If you type in our tool, X, you'll sometimes get X, but you'll also get Y and Z. Our engine is computed they're related based on the content of those stories, but sometimes it's a bit hard to work out why, and this throws journalists, because I think we're so Googleized now that we expect to get the answer. In fact, we get quite frustrated sometimes when we can't find out the answer by just typing it into Google. So there's some preparation work needed with that. And then finally, what the tool also does is extracts entities from the news story that's sort of summarized here, and you see them in little colored entity boxes, and then it sort of, as you drag your mouse around, and I'll show this in the demo, it pops up with lots of suggestions for angles really quickly. So as you move your mouse around, you can see 20 or 30 possible angles for the story. Some are idiotic, some may even be offensive due to the sort of combination of content. We can't control that, but it only needs one or two to stick. And in early evaluations with this, with journalists, people were generally getting angles in about 2 or 3 minutes of using the tool. So ironically, we're trying to design a product that we want people to use for as little as possible. This is quite a hard sell in the business world, but that's the essence of how we've designed this to work. So just in case some of you have got a technical mindset, I'm going to show this picture just for the hell of it, but you don't have to dwell on it. The key thing is really, let me just move that away. The key thing is how it works. In background, we've built an engine that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, every half hour, reads RSS feeds from about 380 news sources of news written in 6 European languages, and uses that content to construct what we call a creative news index. So we produce an index of really interesting creative information about that, including the source, the title, and so on. We store that, which means the tool reads about, if I can call it reads about 20,000 news stories a day. And every time the tool, the journalist uses it, I will in a minute, we're using that index. That index is being compiled now for about 2 years. So we've got just over 14 million news sources. We've actually kind of got a landscape of news from those news sources over the last 2 years. And that's essentially how it works. We've also plugged in over 50,000 political digital cartoons, or I should say digital political cartoons, which are essentially humorous visual takes on news. And we also searched that. That was developed by one of our Dutch partners. So that's how we deal with the humor bit, by the way. We show cartoons. Why not? So that's Inject. And before I do the demo, you're going, well, where's the science journalism part? So our storyline is like this. We started in January 2017, actually. We've just got around about €750,000 to start up the business, to invest in a new startup business. It should launch this time next year. So that's kind of where that's going, and that's general journalism. Now, the thing that Sage has been saying, right, which I've always been a bit nervous about, I think they may have oversold this yet because we haven't started the design work, although I'll fudge a demo, is the Quest project is a new European project that's looking at science journalism, and science communication is building on that. So we start in 2 weeks. We will be building along this. So we will be building on the functionality and the capabilities. So in the demonstration I do, it requires a slight bit of imagination. But what we have done already is we've added to the 380 news sources up to about 100 English language, more specialized science publications, Nature and things like this, to it. So we're also sort of harvesting, if I can put it that way, and building a creative news index of stuff about science just to build this up. That will increase to hundreds once we start the design work next month. And of course, as the first chat I had with Daniela was, we could actually, if you've got your own index of archivable materials, we can also plug that in. So we can take news archives of a business or an organization and simply plug that in one go. We don't have to harvest it. You just give us it and we'll produce an index of it, and you can look at the whole of Sage, X, Y, and Z publications or any other publisher. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on one story. So in the Quest project, we decided to focus on 3 easy areas of science communication: climate crisis, vaccines, and the effect of artificial intelligence on the world. Easy to do in a year. I thought that wasn't my choice. It was a way of doing this. I'm going to focus on the vaccines one. It's slightly more manageable. Okay. So here we are, we're in Google Docs, and this was working earlier when I checked it, right? So you've got the tool like I showed it before. Maybe I can just enlarge the window slightly. And I've reached a certain age where I can't do this now without glasses, so apologies. Oh, that's quite nice. I can swivel. So basically, the first thing is I'm in Google Docs. I've lost my mouse, and what I can do, actually, what I will also do is increase the window size. Maybe a little one less. What I can do is say, I'm interested, let's start just with the measles vaccine. Go pick that. And I can also type in keywords here, but I can also ask the tool just to extract some meaningful content from that. Very straightforward. It just takes out measles vaccine as a search term or a topic term. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to launch a creative search based on content that's available in target sources, and it will now do the searching of that index of 14 million news stories based on an engine. It's going to come back with content. So whenever it comes back, it just gives you a summary of why we've discovered stuff. So it's discovering news articles. Can you read this at the back, by the way? Okay. Maybe. The problem is I lose sort of screen. All right, we'll do it this way. So telling you, the way I set it up just now, it's going to get information from the past year written in English rather than other languages. I can change all of this. I'm ordering them based on relevance rather than random, and I'm using public news sources rather than private ones that are set up. And then what it's doing is it's giving me stories that are some way creatively related to the topic term that I've put in. So we've got one from PLOS One here, and then there's one from The Independent, another one from PLOS One, Science, CNN. So you notice one of the things that the tool already does, which is a feature that we're going to write into the science journalism tool, is essentially a strategy of synthesis. One of the things we've already identified in discussions with science journalists is one of the effective strategies is you can't just combat a lot of the fake news and the populism out there by just being dry with data. There is a need to synthesize scientific evidence with personal stories and with other. So what we will do is we're going to tailor the way the combinations of information that's provided, so you kind of end up with a kind of collection of stories that can be synthesized together. And this keeps coming up again and again and again as one of the requirements of science journalists. They want all this stuff in one place. At least that's the summary so far, but we've got to do more work on this. So let's just focus on this one, this paper here on modeling spatio-temporal patterns of disease for spatially, it's written Namibia rather than Italy, but I'm just focusing on disease here, on vaccines. So if I click on this, I can immediately go to the journal at source. So I can go and read that if I want it, just to sort of drill down into it. You may notice also, as I move the mouse around over this, you're getting sort of creative prompts. So from the title, it says use the same information sources cited in this story, not so particularly useful one. But you'll notice as I come down here, there's a whole bunch of entities that have been extracted from the story, which might be relevant. So there's the World Health Organization, there's something called Z-Transform, which I don't even know what that is, United States Census, non-parametric statistics, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, biological classification. Now they are related. They're not necessarily named in the story, but they're concepts that we've identified are described informally or at least partially in the story that might be relevant. So this in some sense is building on what we found through the creative search engine. And then as I move the mouse around, you can maybe see, for those of you at the back, I shall do this in a dance mime afterwards to give you an idea of what it does. It's essentially giving you creative prompts, which you can sort of browse very quickly just by moving the mouse around. So, you know, the prompt here is, what does this story mean for the future of the World Health Organization? So that's an interesting question. What does this mean for the, you know, what is the measles vaccine and indeed fighting vaccines generally as diseases start to come back into the world? What does that mean for who? Maybe there's a story in that. Explore the data that's available out the United States Census and incorporate that into your story. So there might be data about diseases and so on, or child deaths if we're looking at measles. Think about the Association of Southeastern Asian Nations and explore an angle that's based on the significance of it. Well, I've no idea what the Association of Southeastern Asian Nations is. This is the danger, by the way. I've no idea what's coming up each time. I should explain. This tool is creating new outputs every time. This is not like a guide that's figured out what the demo is going to do in advance, I should warn you. So if I click on this, it'll then sort of go to Wikipedia and just pull up a description of what this is. It's some kind of regional organization comprising of da-da-da-da-da. And the same can go pretty much for Z transformation. In mathematics and signal processing, the Z transform converts a discrete time signal, blah, 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 okay? That's all based on Wikipedia and other public content. So we're bringing all this content into one place for the journalist. Where was I? And it's the same here. As the tool works around, I can get creative prompts, unpick what the relevance of the Kuwaini region is. Now, at the moment, and this is a region within Namibia, that's maybe interesting. You could focus on, your story might encourage you to focus on regions of places. Now, at the moment, the design of the tool, and these prompts in particular, are designed for general journalism rather than science journalism. At the end, I will show you some prompts that we've kind of redesigned with science journalism in mind, based on initial feedback from science journalists, and that's in a mock-up form I'll show you at the end. Now, the way the tool is designed at the moment is that you can then kind of flip the card. So this card here, you can flip it and do other things. I could, for example, insert the reference. So let's just go here. I could sort of, I might go, that's an interesting article. Oh, there's an invalid link there. I have no idea why that is. That's a live demo. I could say, well, these prompts here are kind of interesting, but they're not really working for me. Give me some more, so it'll refresh them. And then what it'll do is it'll give you another 10 entities that are kind of referenced in the story. So those 10 are not the only 10 that are referenced. Typically, we find about 50 or 60 for a 300-400 word article. So you can look again and it'll play the game again. You notice here it's got WHO as an acronym this time. Some of them keep coming back and you can play the game. Some more experienced journalists have told us, I really hate these pop-ups. They're really annoying me. So what we allow them to do is to show the creative sparks in list form. And if you're kind of interested in sort of keeping these, you can copy them and then just put them into your text document to come back to later on. So there they are. You can just store them and work with them as you want to go. Where was I? I'm here, wasn't it? Go back. What I can also do with any single retrieved news item is I can also, a very simple one, but journalists said they liked it, give us a word cloud, Neil, give us a word cloud. So that was really easy to implement for us, 2 lines in a piece of software. And so you can look at what the most important things they're talking about in that article. And that might give you some inspiration around, what's in there, social services and so on. And then last but not least, what we uncovered when we first gave the tool to journalists, when I said they would only work with it for 2 or 3 minutes, what we found was they come up with an angle and then they go back into their preferred tool of choice to drill down on that new angle. And that alternative tool of choice is always, not always, but almost all the time Google. Journalists are constantly working with Google. And so what they were then doing is copying out what they come up with and putting it into a Google search. We thought this is ridiculous. So what we did, if you can't beat them, join them. What we then designed was essentially you could just take where we are and do a Google search. So basically where I am at the moment, I'm looking at a story that is about, oops, I didn't mean to do that, sorry. Go away. A story that's about modeling spatio-temporal patterns of disease in Namibia. And I'm looking at sort of data and evidence. So what I'll ask the tool to do is to generate in a new tab, a Google search, go away. A Google search based on what are the numbers behind spatio-temporal patterns of disease, and you can drill down into the underlying stories. So simply by having several tabs open, you can do a kind of breadth-first search in our tool to find the angles, and then have separate tabs open to drill down into these various sources. So if I just go into something, I don't know what this is, that's going to open up. You get something. Interesting piece of work there that gives you the possibly the original source, but I'm not doing this very carefully organized way. So that just gives you a flavor of what you get from one news card that comes back. Just happens to be at the top of the list because I've ordered them by relevance. But as we scroll down, I don't know why I took the glasses off, scroll down, there's something here about long-term measles, induced something or other from science. Then you get something from CNN, which is obviously much more popular, maybe focus on other kinds of protected from measles, depending on where you're born. That can be an interesting sort of angle for a story. Daily Mail, 5 mothers sue New York City over a mandatory vaccine order. So you've got that whole sort of fight between individual rights of parents versus the state and more general protection that comes into all of this story. A bit more science again, something in the Irish Independent, actually several things. The Daily Beast. And you can see how you've got quite a lot of sort of combined stories here. Now, as I said, at the moment, this is presented in a simple list form for general journalism. What we're going to try and do is design sort of different combinations of types of stories, maybe a personal story, maybe some data science stories, maybe some sort of uplifting stories, and combine them together into a sort of data set that the journalist could download to work with based on ones that they might tick or otherwise on this list. And that's how we see Quest going. If you've got questions, by the way, just shout. Good. So there you go. And at the time, at any run, we limit it to about 30 stories at the moment. It's really just a design choice not to give people hundreds to scroll through, because clearly there are, out of 14 million, there are going to be thousands that will possibly meet the basic threshold of being some way creatively related to this. So I'm just looking at one story here, which is giving me stuff that's about backing and evidence. So obviously we implemented other ones as well. So if I look at people, it generally pulls out people that might be relevant. Sorry, that person comes up everywhere. He's just everywhere. You can't avoid him. So what it does is it pulls out people from stories and presents them as cards on the unique. I'm not going to click on the Donald Trump link. What else we're going to get? So this is basically said, so Donald Trump keeps coming up in stories. He could be an angle. I mean, the tool doesn't know about Donald Trump at that level, right? It's just putting out the name as someone that's in the public sector or in the public domain. And here are some stories that relate to Donald. Jesus, Andrew Wakefield. We're getting them all here, aren't we? So he's clearly identified as somebody. Jay Inslee, American politician. So he might or she might have something going on with respect to measles vaccines. Another American politician that's interesting. Sanjay Gupta, Indian American neurosurgeon and medical reporter. So that could give you an angle. Have a look at what sort of medical reporters in other parts of the world are writing about. American politician, again, a lot of them here today. Donovan, oh my lord, takes us back, some of us. Matt Hancock, okay, you might expect him to come up, Health Secretary. Roald Dahl, okay, is there a relationship between Roald Dahl and measles? I don't know, it's interesting. Child author, you know, you think about this, you abstract the role, there may be something interested in that, give you an angle. Okay, outgoing Prime Minister, Gavin Newsom, American politician, Alex Salmond, that's a sort of Rick Astley. Okay, somehow our tool has identified a link between Rick Astley and measles vaccines. You could drill down on that. You might want to investigate. Let's have a look at Rick. We go to his Wikipedia page. You might want to drill down on that story. There may be something interesting in it. I'm not going to do that now. Do that on the way home. And you see, so it's pulling out various people here. What we can also do is look at long stories. So this will put out longer stories. These are longer explainer style. They have to be at least about 800 words long, and it will give you it'll be more about the why and the background of vaccines. So if you're wanting to write something that's a longer, more detailed story, you can go to these and get sources of information. I won't show the rest. So at any point, I should stress, you can go in and change all of this. So if I also then add, I want to drill down and look at Italy. In this, because that's been an interesting sort of case study over the last year, certainly in the government trying to undo the maximum, the statutory requirement to vaccinate your children. We will then get slightly different. So searching on relevance, the first story that comes up this time is several from the Daily Mail, interestingly. That's interesting. There's only a few there that's coming up. I don't know why that is. Sometimes it does something fun. Oh, I know, I'm in that story. So I'll go here. What do I get here now? So you get something from Hacker News. So there's going to be something more focused on Italy and all of that. Interesting story from the Congo, but why is that related to Italy? I don't know. There may be things inside there. Science events that shape the news is talking about maybe measles in Italy. So you can see how you can also manipulate this. And if I'm interested, at the moment I've got them ordered by relevance, so I'm going to get something at the top to show you, but I can also move to random. And that's what we often encourage the journalist to use. Just use it in random mode, because that's kind of creative. You want different stuff coming up every time. If I run it again, so you notice at the top of this list is now Italy's vaccination U-turn stunned scientists. If I run it again, please give me something. Oh no, it doesn't. Okay. But you get the idea, it's giving you different orders of things so you can play. And that's the difference to Google. It will give you something different each time, even though you're not changing the order of it. So it gives you a flavor of what the tool does. This Inject tool is available online. You can go to the Inject website and download versions of it if you want to play. At some point, we will start charging for it as the business signs up. So if you do want to get in early, that's not a bad thing to do. So just finishing off, as I said, we are now moving towards Quest. So I've given you at least a flavor of how it's going to work. And if you imagine a kind of tool like that with changes running on top of hundreds and hundreds of scientific outputs. So one of the things I said we'd do, and I apologize for those of you at the back, what we said we'd do is we've explored how to change the prompts, the little pop-up creativity sparks, to align them more with science journalism. And essentially at the moment I've taken inspiration from something called rhetorical structure theory, which is how you relate concepts in a narrative, which will drive you in different directions to explain, to elaborate, to describe, to underpin, to provide background for. So the kind of prompts that we're looking at now, so if you've got just one entity, which is say measles outbreaks, think about different contexts of measles outbreaks that might reveal story angles. Think about how science offers different solutions to measles outbreaks. Think about how elaborating on examples of measles outbreaks that your audience might want to know about. These kinds of directions, I think, are nudging you in ways that are more appropriate for science journalism than we had in the tool. And to be honest, to install these, it's really just plugging in one set of text files as opposed to another with some simple rules. So that's giving you a flavor of the direction the tool will go there. Another thing that's quite interesting is audience personas. Who are you writing for? So one of the things we're going to give the journalist control over is a set of audience personas. So we have done a review of literature, and there doesn't seem to be a huge amount out there that we've uncovered of different audience segments for science journalism, from the real science files at one end to the audience that maybe we need to address more, which is the disengaged audiences, or the audiences that are essentially the naysayers that sort of are adopting other sources of news. So the tool will also, first of all, enable the journalists to choose between a range of different personas that we're developing. So this is Michelle, who's in disengaged persona, and her particular instance of the story builds on all of the characteristics that the research shows are typical of these people. So you'll be able to select between these, and then the tool will reason about the content of these. So what would Michelle think about this? What would John think about that? So you would be able to use the personas not just as a sort of guide to remind you of who you're writing for, but also as embedded in the tool support. And I should say, this shouldn't be, I don't think this is denigrating the work of journalists. I mean, in the design world, we use personas all the time. If you're designing a bit of interactive tech, you have on your office wall a full description of the typical personas of the people you're designing for to stop you writing for or designing for yourself. So I can't see why simple techniques like this can't work with journalists. So we're having audience personas. The other thing we're building is sort of various sort of story roles. So, you know, the protagonist, the antagonist, the secondary characters, the flat characters, and these kinds of roles can also be built into stories. Cards that pop up like this, think more about your antagonist. Your antagonist is the personal thing that causes your protagonist drama. And it's just nudging you to think of other things. So at the moment, the flat text, but they will be emerging as more interactive creativity support as you write. Can we analyze what you've written, and then I diagnose it to think you've not got enough of this, or perhaps not enough of that, to nudge you in future directions. So that is coming. This is where our design work is at the moment. It kind of looks like that. And I was saying to Daniela, our probable plan is September, when everyone's back from holidays, is ideally to run some design workshops where we paper prototype the use of the tool as is with lots of these kinds of mocked up versions and figure out what people like. Because we are hypothesizing, we're conjecturing at the moment that this can be valuable based on research in science journalism and in journalism generally, and the feedback we've got so far. But we haven't road tested any of these ideas. It would be good for us to road test them early on. And since my office is just around the corner, London's a good place to do this. So that's kind of an option if anyone thinks this could be interesting, you want to spend a couple of hours and work with us on this. Right. I slightly overran, but never mind. So if you want information, these are the projects, these are the Twitter feeds, and I'm happy to talk about things. The journalist should remain the creative agent. That it would be possible for us, using the algorithms that we have, to do more than this prompting. We could, if a journalist is interested in direction, we could map out a possible outline story with notes and stuff and put that into the Word document or the Google Docs document that's there on the left-hand side. We decided not to do that because that felt like over-automating. Likewise, we could put in draft sentences instead of think abouts. We could put in draft sentences that could copy into there. So that's over-automating. And it's interesting. I think there's a real sort of nuanced issue with AI about the degree to which we automate and give the journalist or whoever the user is the power to control and make decisions. So even if you're kind of nudging and cajoling them like a magician, forcing you to take the particular card they want, we're kind of doing that, but you still feel they're in control. And I think ultimately they are in control of direction. So that was one value. A second one, which I said earlier, I can't remember them all now, there were about 5 that drove the tool design, was the fact that they don't want to work from statistical sources. They don't want to work from census data straight away. They want to work from verified sources that come from verified news. So with the tool, the 380 news sources, we have a sort of informal editorial team of journalists on the project that is deciding what is okay and what isn't. So we don't have Breitbart, we don't have the Daily Express. Just to balance this up, we don't have Communism Today or something like that, right? We're trying to sort of stay within bounds of sources that people think are acceptable. Basically, if you can imagine, I was doing a drawing of what the system would look. If you can imagine, I was sketching the sidebar in a paper form to show you what it looked like if I didn't have any digital tools. So technically, that's what a wireframe is. It's a sort of informal drawing of the interface with where the buttons are in the information. But the irony is you can make them on digital computers, so you can interact with them. You can click a drawn button, and it will actually do what the system will do. So the idea is you try and make it look informal. So if I present this to somebody, it kind of looks fixed. It looks like I can't change it anymore. So your instinctive reaction is not to contribute. Wireframes are designed to engage people in the design process by sketching. We think there is a subtle but different set of requirements to Inject. That's what's coming back to us. I mean, I can't, if I put this in front of people, they kind of want different things. The research into science journalism that we've been looking at and the data collections coming from our partners across Europe suggest they want subtly different things. So when I say it's different, there's an awkward branding problem here. It's essentially 2 versions of the same tool built on the same platform. I haven't quite figured out how this is going to play out when it comes to licensing. So by the time we finish the science journalism project, if everything goes to plan, Inject will be a self-contained product with our own company, and there's going to be sort of weird licensing arrangements. To me, I'd like to try and keep it all in one umbrella, but that might not be possible. So there are variations on a tool. I think it's sort of specializations for this, specializations for that. I'm not involved in that. We have a number of journalism schools that are involved in a lot of data collection at the moment. Most of it, I would say, is qualitative and in-depth work that's talking to dozens of journalists rather than looking breadth first. One thing that I didn't show you, and we've got in the tool, is you have to log into it to use it using your Gmail account or your Twitter or name. We got that, and behind that, we haven't implemented this, is you can set up your user profile. So when it logs on, I want to do it by relevance rather than random, and I want it to search these sources rather than these. This is sort of boring but quite time-consuming software development to set that stuff up. So we haven't implemented it yet. So there will be the possibility that people can go in and set up their profiles. I hope that people won't do that. I really do. I mean, you talked about the Daily Mail. I mean, the Daily Mail has provided letters of support for our investment. So I imagine the Daily Mail group, trading group, will be one of our early users of this. And when I talk to the Science Media Centre, is it the Science Media Centre here in London? You know, they think there's an awful lot of good health reporting that goes on in the Daily Mail that doesn't necessarily always align itself with the kind of Brexit populist view that you find on the front page. So there's sort of nuances to this, I find. But I mean, we will allow a degree of personalisation of the tool because I think that's essential. But I'm hoping that it will nudge people to think more reflectively, shall we say, about some of the stories they're writing. A lot of the discussion around this is around big data, machine learning, where you take large data sets, say of 20-year-old American college students that are not typically representative, let's say, of, Google designs a facial recognition algorithm based on that, or you're using data sets are based on medical records of a certain set of the population, or maybe a better example is mortgage records. So clearly there's an issue there. I would say that our algorithms themselves are actually neutral. I think they are neutral because they don't make explicit reference to data. We're just looking for a similarity between what you type in at the top and what is reported in news. So I think the scope for bias in our case is very rare because I would say almost all of the creative guidance is derived from the the news that is being retrieved by the algorithms. Yes, you could argue that there's built-in bias in some of the prompts, but our aim is everything's been co-designed to a degree, so we're getting feedback on journalists throughout. So I would say the biggest source of bias is actually in the kind of interactive pop-ups and things that come up rather than in news, unless you're arguing the news itself is biased, which of course it is. We have an editorial team that kind of looks to try and get a broad balance of more liberal versus other, it's not perfect, but they are curated news sources from across the world. And of course, you can plug in other news sources. If we got a big client in, say Australia, don't have many Australian newspapers in there. If we get a big client in Australia, we can then set up the algorithm to start reviewing news that's out there and collecting news. So you can then build up a more population. When you're testing in Scandinavian regional newsrooms, they have very specific needs. It's about sort of the annual cycle of things that happen in a particular valley or in a particular town. It's sort of very, very specific news. So they're much more interested in that news. So they're being biased by their own local news sources. So I don't think we can get away from that completely. We should just recognize it's there and recognize the nature of it so we can try and counter it. Our index will not know that. So you'll only find out if you click on the link and it's not there anymore. And that might not suggest it's been retracted. There may be just a problem with the URL. We won't know that, to be honest. But then the entities, whether or not we're not processing the nature of the arguments. So if they make a claim that's false in the paper, apart from the title, we don't make any reference to it. We'll talk about the entity. So if they make a claim about X and what X said about Y, we don't know anything about what X said about Y. We'll just have the entity X and Y. So I think it's I don't think that's a problem. The index itself is not going to capture what is likely to cause a retraction. Yeah, but we can read them via RSS feeds. So yeah, we can't get to the times, for example, or anything that's in that that group. So yes, we are relying on essentially the basic version of the tool operates on public RSS feeds. So we have to read it at the time. If you said, can you go and look at that article 3 months ago, because the RSS feed will have gone, unless we can access it, we can't do that. So we're operating on public RSS feeds. If in the future the nature of news changes, then we're a bit stuffed. And we need an alternative way of exploring and modelling news. But at the moment, I think there is no direct threat to public RSS feeds that I'm aware of. But then we live in difficult times, so you never know. At the moment it's not, but actually the personas, I mean, they're still being developed, but they kind of talk, they give broad types, so different types of audience personas for science journalism take news from certain sources. Some groups use Facebook, others use Science and Nature magazines. So there's clearly general types, but we haven't thought about what might be attracting different age groups. I think that's quite interesting. Maybe we could drill down on the personas and say they're more likely to use this specific channel. That's interesting. I might take that away. There's two things. If I reach three, I'm going to run out of. I'm going to have to start writing stuff down. But no, that's an interesting feature. Yeah, I think it's like a nudge tool or a sort of nudging and recommending. That's kind of how I see it. It's not going to, you're not going to make a major scientific breakthrough or reporting about it, but it's going to nudge you to new angles. Just looking at the same problem from a slightly different perspective. And this is, in creativity theory terms, this is called little c. This is just doing lots of little things differently every day, but collectively and aggregation, the outcome can be quite creative on a bigger scale. The 14 million and growing articles is essentially a landscape of news as we've framed it over the last 2 years. So what we've also done, or we are doing, I should say, is we've written a set of algorithms that essentially look for the gaps. We're trying to write algorithms that search for black holes, if I can put it that way, in information. So if you look at everything that's reported about Brexit, or everything that's talked about economic decline or rise of populism, there are sort of areas which are probably overpopulated. Many newspapers are writing the same things more or less every day, partly to reinforce the message. And there's whole areas where there's sort of, they write about A and B, but no one's taking the intersection of A and B. So we've written algorithms to look for those spaces. One of the algorithms that's more or less working, because we collect knowledge in 6 languages, and this is apparently an old journalist trick. Go and find a foreign language newspaper and look at how they're reporting the story, and their cultural differences will give you different insights. So I live in Italy half the time, and how they report news is quite different to how the British report news. So there's always these fantastic angles. And you can often, normally a lot of stories that appear in The Guardian after 2 days about Italy, they're normally about 2 days old when they appear. So there's a gap there if you're smart. So our tool can spot all of that. So yes, we are working on those kinds of algorithms. And we will do about science journalism in about a year's time. Is that an answer?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think if you've got a map of news, then you can do really quite clever things with it, and you can analyse it and send an email to editors. These are 5 topics that might be relevant to you each morning. So it's in their inbox at 6 o'clock or whatever. I'm going to say, as a scientist, do as I say, not as I do. No, I'm joking with that. Yes, it has. I think there is a problem in science education, which is when I did my PhD, you were never taught to be creative. You were taught to do statistical analysis. You were taught to do structured literature reviews. You were taught to show traceability. I have taught creativity to PhD entry-level classes and things, and I think there's a chronic need for that. So yes, there is a need for a tool like this, and I think you could certainly use it on science abstracts, for example, or you could look at method sections. You could take the method section of papers and generate creative ideas about how to conduct a study or experiment. And we thought everyone asked for this actually, but we haven't found anyone that's prepared to pay for it yet. So we would do this But obviously, software development costs and my team have been around for quite a long time, so they're not cheap. So, oh, well, let's have a beer afterwards, all right? But no, I think it is. It would be really useful for scientists because, I mean, we're all under the same cost time-wise as journalists. We never have time. It's a very hard time to find time to reflect and think creatively about your own work. So I think a tool like this could be quite useful, suitably tailored for science. I'm willfully interdisciplinary. I never get into one subject in too much detail. I'm constantly prowling around the boundaries of things. I'm good at relating things, that's me. I did my PhD was analogical reasoning. If you understand what analogies are, they're all about relationships. So don't ask me to define a very detailed formalism for something. I can do it, but it'll hurt my brain and I won't like it. If you want me to think conceptually about relationships between things, I'm fine. So I'm interdisciplinary. And I never stay in one place for too long.